why are they pushed out of the country? Why are
They're in danger.
They're in danger. Yep. So either food, somehow danger to their safety, security, some kind of persecution, something like that. Okay, so that's a refugee. What's an asylee? A little more difficult.
Somebody who's able to get government help to settle in a different country.
Good, good. So they're able to get protection by a government to settle in the country. Usually the same reasons. So they have to be forced out of their country either for religious persecution, political persecution, or threat of bodily harm. And an immigrant. What's an immigrant?
Someone who chooses to come to another country.
Sure, somebody who chooses. Yeah, and it could be for quality of life issues, but probably they won't be killed if they stay in the country. Okay, so we are part of the Refugee Highway. There's a Refugee Highway Partnership in the United States and Canada. It's part of the North American Refugee Roundtable, and so we're part of this organization. It's maybe, I think it's growing. I want to say about 50 churches in the United States that are, and organizations that are just committed to serving refugees coming into America and helping them and be part of a Christian witness to them as well. So most refugees, they get kicked out of their country, and the average wait is 17 years right now. So it's growing every year. That means they're in a country temporarily that they're waiting either in a refugee camp or they're waiting in just in a city in the country, but they have no rights. So a refugee can't work, a refugee can't buy a house, they can't own land. So it's a lot like illegal immigrants in America as far as what rights they have. They have to be very careful, fly under the radar, and if they get caught, they get sent back to their country, which is usually a very bad situation. So, I'm trying to think. So Jordan's a great example of a host country. So Jordan has refugees from Iraq living there, and Jordan has refugees from Syria living there, and it also has refugees from Somalia and several other Middle Eastern countries. Jordan has barely enough water for its own population. Its second largest city is now a refugee camp. So if you can imagine the population dynamic problems that causes. So, I think Madaba is the name of the city. It's about 100,000 people. So if you can imagine a city of 100,000 people just popping up in the middle of the desert. That's kind of one of the problems. They have their own economic issues. It's mostly a desert country with one valley where you can grow food. So. But it's stable politically, and so that's why everybody's going there. So a country like this doesn't want these people in it. So, and if you look at Jordan's history, they've had problems with Palestinians trying to take over the government in the past. They've had issues with immigrants and refugees coming into their country and causing problems to their stability. So the UN is supposed to give money to governments like this and supposed to take care of refugee camps. The problem is the UN has about 1/10 of the funding it needs to do this. So it's a huge issue. They're vastly underfunded for these projects. And the number of refugees are just growing and growing. Another problem is the countries that are accepting them are starting to shut down and close the borders. So Europe was a huge refugee accepting country, or territory, the EU. And now the EU is starting to shift their politics. So many refugees have come into the European Union that country by country they're shutting down. And as the population dynamics change, so like France is 10% North African immigrant. And that's causing the French people, who were very open-minded before and wanted a lot of people to come, to start to want to preserve their culture and shut down the process, or they think it's going to change the country. Netherlands has a ultra-nationalistic party. I don't know the guy's name. Van Wilder is his last name. And this politician's basically getting more and more popular, and he says we don't want Moroccans, we don't want people from other countries coming here. And he's starting to get more and more support from these people. And that country is clearing out immigrants and kicking them out. And so Sweden is the same way. It's getting to be about 10% Somali immigrants and refugees, and they're starting to shut down the process. So right now, the only country that's expanding the number of refugees is the United States. Last year, we accepted 200,000 refugees. This year, we accepted 260,000 refugees, and the number is just growing and growing. Part of that is the U.S. doesn't have an ethnocentric population. We're such a mixed population that it's not going to threaten our culture to accept more people from other countries, because that's just how it's built. But it causes problems in the United States. A lot of Americans can't tell the difference between a refugee and an immigrant. A refugee basically comes into the country and has full rights of citizenship. They're not a citizen yet, but they can't get deported. They're not going to, the government's not that mean. So, yeah, and they can't vote for 5 years. They have to take the citizenship test after 5 years. But for most purposes, they have work authorization from the moment they enter the U.S. It's a nice process. An asylee has to make it to the American border and declare to the government, I am seeking asylum. If they do that, the Border Patrol will arrest them and throw them in jail, and then they have a series of court cases to prove that they need to stay in the U.S. or they'll get killed, basically, if they go home. It's tough. It requires proof. It requires a lot of evidence, and it's a long process. So for about 9 months, usually these people can't work, and they basically need to find somebody who will host them. So after about 2 months, they get let out of jail if their first court case goes well. Otherwise, they get deported, and then the process can take anywhere from 9 months to a couple of years, proving your need to stay in the U.S. So that's a very tough case. Tough way to do it. Some people will make it into the U.S. on an existing visa and then declare themselves, and they have until their visa runs out to at least get through the first court case in the process. So that's tough. It requires a lot of proof. A refugee just has to make it to a neighboring country. You can't declare yourself a refugee while you're living in your country. You're obviously the situation is bad enough that you're forced to leave. An immigrant just needs a visa, so student visas are actually a huge way people are immigrating. So, kind of different ways, yeah.
You said that refugees typically will wait about 17 years on average.
Yeah.
Wait for what?
So there's an organization called IOM, and it's like a big NGO, non-governmental organization, and they do blood testing, and they match families up, because during war, families tend to get separated and end up in different refugee camps, and so they'll try and put them together, and they talk to other governments to try and find a host government for these families. But really the wait is just because the number of governments accepting refugees is, and the number of refugees they're accepting is so much smaller than the refugee population in the world right now. So that's why that number is growing.
Okay, so that transitions you from a refugee to an immigrant at that point? Does that your status change?
No. So you're a refugee for that whole time while you're waiting.
Okay.
Which means according to the UN rules for any UN members, they can't kick out a refugee from their country, and they have to take care of them. That causes problems because most of these countries don't want them there. So Kenya's another example. They're clearing out the world's largest refugee camp, which is the Dadaab one, which is Somalis, and they're kicking them back into Somalia because of the terrorist attacks in Kenya, and church attacks. So that's an old ethnic hatred between Kenyans and Somalis. So, it's tough. They're not supposed to do that, but at the same time, the UN really can't do much to stop it. Yemen's a good example. They'll actually shoot Somalis coming on boats to try and kill them before they step foot on the beach, because then they have to host them, take care of them until they get resettled. So there's a lot of horrible things that happen to refugees. They make up the largest trafficked people group by far. So the UN has these rules, but countries just don't want the economic struggle of taking care of these refugees, paying for their food, and paying for the camps. Yeah. So it's a really tough situation. So the 17 years is just people growing up in refugee camps mostly. So we have students. So I grew up in Somalia, and I have students showing up at the school who are my age who spent most of their lives in refugee camps. They're just making it to America now. And there's a lot of students who are just born in refugee camps and never knew their home country. So it's a common thing.
So with the world's population doubling in the past 40 years and possibly doubling again in the next 20, what's the outlook?
Yeah, the outlook looks like the UNHCR is going to collapse at some point. There's just not enough money. So, there's huge migration routes within Africa, up to Europe, into South Africa, and into parts of Asia, and through South America. A lot of migrant workers, and it looks like that's going to keep increasing. The numbers of people going to Europe and things like that will keep increasing also.
Do these refugees living in refugee camps in the U.S.?
No, the United States, we don't have refugee camps because they're two neighboring countries. They don't have wars, so there'd have to be basically a war or a big famine for a lot of refugees to cross the border all at once for us to do that. So we just because Mexico is, it's not a great country, but it's decently well off compared to most of the other Central American countries. So Mexico will accept refugees. Sometimes they still shoot people at their southern border, trying to keep them from crossing. So they don't want Guatemalans coming over because they have to take care of them if they do. So it's tough. So they're almost a buffer to the United States as far as refugees coming into the U.S. But say if there was a civil war in Canada, we'd have to take people as refugees, and then maybe we'd have to set up a camp. But
Are they able to live anywhere they want?
In the U.S., yeah. So a refugee enters the United States, and they're settled in a city. So basically, resettlement agencies will take government money to, and a contract with it to take care of a refugee when they come. So a resettlement agency will say, we will accept 200 Hmong people this year, or 200 Burmese people. And then those people will come in throughout the year. They'll take the money from the government, the federal government, and they'll find housing for them and set them up with health care. For 9 months, they'll take care of these refugees. So a refugee gets a choice. They come to America. They get settled in a city by a resettlement agency. They can leave if they want to, but if they leave the city, they'll lose all of their government aid. It's their choice. They can go to another city and work if they have family in that city. And the U.S. government tries to settle them in a city where they already have family, if they can. So they really try and work it out for their benefit. But we've had a few cases of people not understanding the system. They'll come to Milwaukee, they'll move to another city, and they'll lose their case. So they have residency, they can be here, but they're going to lose out on all of their aid for the first 9 months, which is a tough transition in the U.S. if you don't have that aid to help you out. So the resettlement agencies really determine who comes to what city by who will accept. Milwaukee has 4 refugee resettlement agencies, and I think in Wisconsin there's 6 total, but 5 are operating right now. So Yeah, so each one of them will hire staff members. So they'll hire a Iraqi person to help with their Iraqi immigrants or Iraqi refugees, and they'll hire a Burmese person to help be a caseworker for the Burmese refugees. And so usually if you have the caseworker from the, or the language represented, then you accept more people from that ethnic group. So because of that, different cities get different mixes of refugees. Atlanta gets a lot of Nepali refugees, while Milwaukee gets a lot of Burmese and Iraqi, just because of their...
But when it comes to asylees, they are only able to live in prison?
They're not. If they get past their first court case, or if they're here on a legitimate visa and they apply for asylum before their visa runs out, then they can live with a family. But a family has to take them in. I mean, they can't have bank accounts, they can't work, they don't have work authorization. So they're basically going to have to find somebody to take care of them for that time. We have 3 asylees who are volunteering with us right now. They're Christians that were forced out of their countries. So Eastbrook's helping them through their asylum process, and they're living with one of the pastors at Eastbrook. But it's tough on them. They don't know their visa will run out in about a month, and then they need their first court case to go, court date to go to get work authorization and be able to make it here. And their money's running out pretty quickly. So it's tough. So they're not in prison because they had legitimate tourist visas when they came, and they're still active. But if it runs out, then the government could ship them out, like anybody else whose visa would run out. So it's a tough situation. And they're from Syria and Egypt, so you could pray for them. They need these court cases too. Any questions about this? Okay. So every refugee is, 10, 17 years, something like that. So it's a big part of their life, big part of their story. Great thing to ask them about. When you ask somebody where did they come from, sometimes they won't tell you their original country. They'll tell you the transitional country that they lived in for so long. So a lot of our Burmese will say we're from Malaysia. I know they're Burmese, but they lived there for most of their life, and so they identify more with Malaysia than they do with Burma. A lot of Iraqis will say they're from Jordan because they spent most of their life in Jordan. So you really kind of have to ask questions to figure it out sometimes. So here we help all 3 groups. But probably 90% of our refugees, or 90% of our students are refugees. Do you know why people are coming from Burma, Somalia, and Iraq? Persecuting by the government. Good. So let's start with Burma. Why Burma?
Christians have been persecuted in Burma for the past 3 decades.
Good. So it's a big problem. It's a very old war. The Karen, Kachin, Karenni, and Chin people are all, I want to say there's like 90 languages in Burma. So it's not Burmese. Burmese is the main ethnic group, and they have the government and the capital and everything. But a lot of the country is a lot of small tribal areas. So these 4 groups, Adoniram Judson, the first U.S. missionary, went there, and they became Christians. The government has persecuted them for a long time. So they fought a big civil war. A lot of the villages were burned, and most of them got pushed out of the country to Thailand. So a lot of them are coming to Milwaukee through Thailand. So we have several Burmese churches here in Milwaukee. They're kind of a Baptist group, and they're struggling because they're very traditional back in Burma. And when they come here, having their kids go to public schools and their children kind of change on them is tough between the older people and the younger people. right now, we're getting flooded with Rohingya Burmese people, which aren't Christian, they're Muslim. Do you know what's happening with them right now? There's a big genocide. Unfortunately, the Buddhist priests, there's one Buddhist priest in particular who calls himself the Buddhist Bin Laden, and he's proud of that title. And he's riling up the other priests and riling up the people to go into Rohingya villages and burn them. And so they're trying to create a purely Buddhist country. And so there's whole cities of Burmese Rohingya, which are the Muslim group, getting wiped out and killed and slaughtered. So it's just terrible. You know, we look at Buddhism as very peaceful, and it's kind of how it's portrayed in TV in America sometimes. But right now in Burma, which is the biggest Buddhist country, it's a very bloody religion. And certainly a lot of what was done to the Christians was done by the Buddhist majority in the army and government too. A growing part of the community here and a growing part of our student population at the school is Rohingya Burmese. They've gone through a pretty horrible trauma to get here. Okay. Iraq. Do you know why people are coming from Iraq?
Political and religious persecution.
Good. Political and religious persecution. Most of it's religious. Do you know who's doing the persecuting?
Sunnis.
Good. So everyone's guilty of it. It's tough. We have tons of Sunnis and we have tons of Shias here. And all of the Shias that are here lived in Sunni majority areas like Sadr City, part of Baghdad, and the Sunni militias were basically persecuting them and killing them and threatening them to leave. And the Sunnis were threatened by the Shia majorities in the south of the country and the other areas. And so, and then there's a lot of Kurdish people here in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin, and they were just threatened by everybody. So, and they're a minority group. And we have a Syrian Christian coming also, and it's kind of an old Orthodox style Christianity. So, we have several different sects of Islam and ethnic groups coming out of Iraq, and they were all persecuted by each other. So most of it isn't the war, it's just the problems that happened after the war. But we also have about 1,800 to 2,000 Palestinians in this neighborhood as well. And the Palestinians were Iraqi Palestinians, so they lived in Iraq for multiple generations, and they were favored by Saddam Hussein, and he gave them a lot of incentives for the businesses. And he knew because he brought them in, he could trust them as a population group, and they'd be loyal to him if he helped them. They were all Sunni and in a Shia majority country. And so in 2003, when the U.S. invaded, the first group to get heavily persecuted was this Palestinian group. And so we have a large population of them here in Milwaukee. And if you ask them, you know, where are you from? They'll say, I'm Palestinian, I'm from Palestine. And really they're from Iraq, and they grew up in Iraq, but in their hearts they don't want to associate with this because it was a terrible persecution that happened. So they came in 2003 to Milwaukee, and they have a lot of the businesses in this community. And now a lot of the Iraqis are working for them. So it's kind of just the normal pattern of immigration in Milwaukee is that a group comes within 3 to 5 years, they start to gentrify and become business owners, and then the next group will work for them. So that's part of our Italian, German, Greek, Jewish immigration pattern in Milwaukee too. So. Okay, Somalia. That's the last one. Why are people coming from Somalia?
Is there no central government?
Good, good. It's the only place in the world that's had 25 years of no government. Just anarchy. They have a government now, and it controls part of the capital city. So most of the country is still quite lawless. they can't even keep their capital safe. They have help from Uganda, Kenya, and Burundi. All have soldiers there in the African Union. So it's a really tough situation. So first it was clan warfare. Then it was kind of an Islamic court system that got set up. Kenya came in and Ethiopia invaded and destroyed the Islamic court system because they started funding terrorist attacks in Kenya and Ethiopia. And then what came out of that was Al-Shabaab, which was a very big fundamentalist Islamic group that is Al-Qaeda linked, and they control most of the countryside today in Somalia. So a lot of the culture, a lot of the tribal system has basically just been destroyed, and the majority of the population of the country is outside of the country now. They're in neighboring countries and spread out around the world. So it's a huge displaced people group, very large number of people. So most of the people coming to Milwaukee have never seen Somalia. And, they know they're from there, but they've never actually seen it themselves. They just grew up in refugee camps or in alien countries and finally got their visas to America. So, that's a tough thing. So a lot of them want to see it, a lot of them want to go back, but they really don't know what it's like. So we have a neat opportunity because most of what's done to people has been done in the name of Islam, and most of the people coming are Muslims, and so they've been traumatized by their own religion, and so we have a neat opportunity to share God's peace with them, where they can really find peace. So that's what we try to do.
How is this place financially supported?
Yeah, Eastbrook supports